So why don't we get rolling on it? Let's get talking about vulnerability. I'm actually really excited. We haven't done a mental health topic night in several weeks. And so Gladnar, that absolutely derailed my train of thought, and I love it. Very nice. Hey Zoiku. All right, let's try this again. So I haven't done a mental health topic night in several weeks. I'm sorry that that's the one that keeps getting thrown out whenever I have to cancel. I didn't really plan it that way. It's just how it's been. But tonight's topic is vulnerability cycles and survival strategies. I would encourage you, if you didn't pay attention to my Discord message when I put it out, if you got a piece of paper handy and a pen, I recommend like getting one out and drawing along with me, because you can learn a lot about yourself in me doing this. And I think this is something that everybody should have an idea of. Now, granted, you're not going to have a perfectly well-rounded idea of this when we're done today, but like this will at least open up your mind to one way that therapists, not all therapists, but many, think about how like conflict happens and how defensiveness comes up and what it means. And it's a way to have more empathy for yourself in terms of the way that you look at how you engage in relationships where vulnerability comes up. This doesn't have to just be intimate relationships. This can be friendships, this can be family relationships, this can be any relationship you want where there's a level of vulnerability. So, enjoy the lurk, passerby. Will MS Paint suffice in a pinch? Yeah, sure, Alex. I mean, it's not far off from what I'm using. I'm using OneNote. So, all right, I'm gonna make the scene switch. Here's hoping that it goes well for me here. Come on, load up for me. All right, we cool. Well, we lost the chat, but that's fine. Pop the disclaimer up real quick. Hello, Robo. Okay, we cool. By the way, the volume, the music's not overpowering this, is it? I just want to make sure before I get started, because I don't need music overpowering this as much as I love the music. By the way, the music is done by Middream LA. They're on Twitch. You should totally check them out. They're great. So that's my shout out for them. You can spell it it's in the bottom corner of the screen. It's just a tad. Yeah, I can drop it just a little bit. I'm fine with it being down a little bit more. Okay. So, yeah, I'll put it a little lower. I just want it to be in the background as a nice like little filler. So, absolutely, Victoria, go for it. What's your question? And then I will begin. Or are you just gonna leave me hanging? You just messing with me? No pressure to respond to me. Everybody rush Victoria. Let's go. Is it possible to not care about vulnerabilities? I suppose, Hoffman, but honestly, vulnerability is something that I think most people feel in different ways. To not care about it, I guess, like, that's different than to not experience it. I mean, you could experience it and then shut it down, I suppose. But I don't know about not caring about it, because vulnerability is something that most people feel. Like an overwhelming amount of people. What's up, Neuro? My therapist recently lost her mom unexpectedly a couple months ago, and I feel like we're having more disconnect than normal with how I'm feeling about my own loss. I feel like she might be projecting some of her own loss onto mine. Should I bring that up with her? Absolutely, Victoria. Absolutely. I think anytime you feel like you can't fully engage in therapy because of what your therapist is doing, you should absolutely tell them that, and they should respond to that. And if they don't, that's not good. But yes, absolutely bring that up. If I had a client that was feeling that way about the work that I was doing with them, I would absolutely want to know that. So yes, you should totally bring it up. Okay, so we are going to talk about, again, what are called vulnerability cycles and their survival strategies. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is an overview of what these are. Have a good night, Will. About what these are, how they work, and then I'm going to walk through, like, I'm going to draw what this looks like. And you can draw your own along with me as we go through it, if you like. But this is something that a lot of beginning therapists really gravitate towards because, again, it's a really nice, tangible way to look at relationships and when we get stuck in defensiveness and don't really know why we are. So this should hopefully give you some empathy for yourself, potentially empathy for friends, family, significant others, and the like. So let's have some fun. All right. So the first thing that I want to talk about, as I always do, is to provide a little bit of context for this. So this is hopefully this you'll understand, Barry, or unless you're not talking to me, in which I don't think you. Okay, you're not talking to me. So the basic idea of vulnerability cycles is they sit around what we call core impasses. Okay, so if you think about relationships that you are in, like, you know, a significant other, parent-child relationship, friends. No, it's not really K-Trav. By the way, hello, K-Trav. They are, it's I guess it sort of does look like an infinity loop. You could like draw it in a way that it looked like an infinity loop, but you'll see it when I get there. Okay, we have core impasses, and what core impasses are is basically the moments in our relationships where we experience really intense emotional reactivity. So if you think about like a fight that you might get into, or a really tough conversation that you're having, or something that's particularly sensitive to you, where you become, like, you can feel yourself become emotionally reactive. Maybe you have a hard time keeping those emotions in check and you flare up, or maybe you have outbursts, or maybe you shut down, maybe you have a panic attack, like whatever it could be. But think about the times when you have really high emotional reactivity. So I want to give you a second as I check with my notes. I want you to think about the times where you get emotionally reactive and see if you can think about what a pattern is in that. Like, is there a pattern to what either triggers it, or to how it manifests, or to what that emotional reactivity is? Okay. So one of the things that we, as therapists, I'm not going to talk for all therapists, I'm going to talk for me. One of the things that I'm looking for is often what happens is when people get into these core impasses, they have a level of emotion in these interactions that actually then becomes part of the problem. So the attempt to solve the problem, the attempt to negotiate with each other around an argument, starts to become problematic in and of itself. And I'm sure all of you have felt this at some point in time. Either you double down, or what you're fighting on behalf of is something you feel particularly strongly about. And so as a result, what you do is it feels like you can't get around the other person's barricade, and like you're not about to let them past yours. All right, so that's the kind of thing that I'm referring to in terms of a core impasse. Okay, there's all sorts of things that can contribute to these: our values, what kind of day we're having, whether we're experiencing like depression and anxiety, our current emotional state, like all sorts of things can influence this. But in particular, oftentimes where we really get stuck is with our values, and with our core beliefs about ourselves. Okay. Sorry for the bad handwriting. I know I have terrible handwriting. Okay, so this is where we run into all sorts of problems. All right. So that takes us to, so then what is vulnerability in the context of this? Vulnerability is basically when we have to be intimate in some way, whether it's through self-disclosure. It's basically where we feel exposed in such a way that we could be, it's sort of like when Brene Brown talks about shame as being rooted in a fear of isolation. It's very similar. So vulnerability, I mean, and shame really go in hand, but it's where I feel like I'm either past a particular boundary that I am, or like I'm inviting you in a way that I don't often invite others in, or my emotions are now out on the table and I'm waiting for somebody to be able to take care of them and be able to hear them. Okay, so that's what we're talking about when we refer to vulnerability. Like, think about it as like if you had like a burn on your arm and it's really sensitive to touch. It hurts a lot, as opposed to like if you touch some other part of your body, like you feel it, but it doesn't hurt that bad. But if you had like a 2nd-degree burn and I was doing this, it would hurt a lot. It's basically like the mental version of that. So your vulnerabilities are the ones where, like, if any of you were to engage with me in a one-on-one conversation right now and I got to know you particularly well, it's the things about you that if I pushed you on particularly hard, or if I rubbed up against or gave you a hard time about or didn't hear or couldn't hold, it's the parts of you that, like, it would be very sensitive for you. It would cause a level of emotionality in you that you might not experience otherwise. Okay? If this seems basic, I apologize, but like, this is just a good way for me to lay the foundation so that we understand that the way that these cycles work. Okay. Often what happens is when vulnerabilities are triggered, we perceive risk, like emotional risk, and we anticipate pain. So yes, political arguments could absolutely be a spot of vulnerability, Krabby. Actually, they often are, because our political beliefs are often wrapped up in our values. And so we have an emotional attachment to our political beliefs because it's basically the way we orient ourselves in life and in our expectations and in what we want, what we don't want. So yes, this could absolutely be the case. For some people, political chats are really hard to get into because it requires a level of self-disclosure, because you basically are disclosing as you talk about whatever position you take. But those are so wrapped up in really deep values. That's why they're political, because that's why we get activated by them. These are the things that we care about. These are the things that we want attended to. So yes, absolutely. Oh, absolutely, Alex. So let's see. Is there an element of voluntary self-disclosure or a depth of relationship that is inherently part of this kind of vulnerability? I'm thinking about experiencing bigotry from strangers or people from whom little to no lasting relationship. Yeah, I mean, I think I get what you're asking, Alex. And yes, like, self-disclosure is a path to intimacy. So when a person that you don't know is really nasty to you, that might hit you one way. But if a person who you have self-disclosed a lot to and knows a lot more about you, and you feel particularly emotionally invested in that person or people, and they potentially say the same thing, it's going to hit you harder because you've likely taken down some barriers inherently through self-disclosure, but maybe even by choice, because you trust that person. So that's why trauma by people you know, like family members, can be so much more difficult to deal with than like happenstance trauma. Even though they're both hard, I'm not trying to like make them compete. But yes, self-disclosure is absolutely a pathway to vulnerability. So Sure. That's a great example, Bonnie, right? So there's a level of emotion that comes up when that is rubbed up against. And think about how much more that hurts if somebody you trust and have a level of intimacy with says that, as opposed to somebody who doesn't. Okay? Like, they both still hurt, but one is likely to hurt a lot more because there's more vulnerability there. And so that's a core thing that we need to understand as we get into talking about vulnerability cycles, because all of a sudden we're at emotional risk when that gets rubbed up against, and then we anticipate pain. And people feel emotional pain physiologically. I don't know if you probably, like, I'll experience sometimes like stomach aches or like a tightening in my chest, or it'll hurt really badly behind my eyes when I'm anxious. I think I've talked about that before. Like, you can get into your emotional experience by being able to identify how your body's doing. So, all right. Okay, so that lays the foundation for me to get into what a vulnerability cycle is. So what a vulnerability cycle essentially is the way that we protect our vulnerabilities in our relationships. Because even though a friend or family member or partner might be somebody that we trust, it means that our vulnerabilities, particularly, maybe more on the line. And so what we do is, in our lives, not just in a given relationship, what we do is we develop what are called survival strategies as a way to protect ourselves. Okay, so here's where your pen and paper comes in handy. Okay, so I'm going to draw you as a circle. Okay, this is you. What's up, Miss Tess? Oh my God. Hello, Miss Tess. It's good to see you. Yeah, there you go, John. Yep, so there we go. It's actually really important to do body scans. Absolutely. For some people, though, I will say, K-Trav, for some people, doing body scans can be really stressful and like can provoke some stuff. And so if that's something that you struggle with, one, don't be hard on yourself, but two, you might need help from somebody who knows how to dig in there in a way that's safe. But absolutely, I'm a huge believer in that. Can I be a donut? Sure, Immune, if you want to be. What, you don't like my little tail that's in the circle, Gecko? This is just you as a circle, okay? I can go for a donut too, okay? So, as a circle, what I want you to think about, so this is you, okay? You're the blue circle. And then we have the red circle, which is other person. Okay, I'm gonna talk about this in terms of a dyad because this is usually the way it's conceptualized and it's easier for me to do that. But this could be with a group of people or multiple people, okay? Yeah, exactly, Sable. Some have a harder time with that than others. Okay? So imagine that these two people are facing each other. Okay, so I'm gonna draw, how do I want to do this? I'm gonna draw a little line under here. Okay, these people are facing each other, so, okay. I'm not gonna draw a face, and you'll see why in a second, but it's important for you to remember this because I'm gonna divide you into two halves, okay? And so what we have is behind us and protected, we have our vulnerabilities. Okay. And so that's vulnerability for you, and there's vulnerability for the other. And then on this side, we have what are called our survival strategies. Okay, so SS. Our vulnerabilities have, what color do I want to use here? Yeah, we'll use blue. Nope, stop it. Our vulnerabilities have a direct effect on our survival strategies. I'll talk more about this in a second. I just want to make sure that I lay the foundation for what this looks like before I go into depth, okay? So V for vulnerability, SS for survival strategy. The vulnerability is locked behind the survival strategy. Okay, so this is like we keep this vulnerability protected by the survival strategy and behind it. All right. So the way that we think about this is there's a couple things. In order to, first we have to identify what are our vulnerabilities, okay? Before I draw any more arrows. So, what are our vulnerabilities? This could be anything, but this might be like, at its core, if it gets, whoops. So, at its core, if this gets pushed on, what is it that's going to cause you to feel a significant amount of distress and become particularly emotional? Okay, so common examples of this are like feeling disrespected or feeling betrayed or let's see, feeling abandoned, feeling alone, feeling sad. Okay, yeah, core parts of your identity. Exactly, Gecko. So you know, is my appearance something that I am particularly vulnerable about? Is some part of my temperament something that I'm vulnerable, that makes me vulnerable? That when it's highlighted, think of it as like if somebody exposed it and threw it out on the table in front of a bunch of people you trusted and it was up for scrutiny, what would you feel really scared of? And I would encourage you, if you're drawing this along with me, to write that down. Kind of gives it some power when you write it down. If I'm doing this with clients, I would have them write it down. And I do this with clients. This is how I have explained it before. Okay. Yep. So intelligence. That's it. There you go, Gecko. Intelligence, sense of humor, your level of belongingness, right? So isolation, shame. All right, Sable, have a good day at work. My mind just threw out half of what you said. There you go. That's okay. These are, I want to be very clear that as you think about these vulnerabilities, they are nothing to be ashamed of, okay? This is just what they are. Being accused of sexism, okay? So, right, so you got to dig deep in here, right? Because what I would ask, so I'm not going to ask you specifically, Krabby, but like what question I would ask about that is, what about being accused is really difficult for you, right? What about, so maybe it's safety, maybe it's, you know, whatever it is. I'm not claiming to know your experience, Krabby, but like think about digging deeper into this. Like what's underneath what makes this difficult for you? Is it related to a particular theory of therapy? I would say probably the closest would be like emotionally focused therapy, K-Trav. Like would do a lot with this. Just because it's all about vulnerability and kind of building attachment. Okay, so think about what those are. So there are premises that we develop through our life that make these vulnerable to us. So what might be vulnerable for one person may not be experienced as vulnerable for somebody else, and that's because of our prior experiences. Now, when we couple in relationships, we often don't know what those are. And a lot of times we don't talk about them up front because it's so vulnerable for us to do that. Like if we talk about this in some kind of like, you know, talking about, you know, yeah, okay, that's a good one, that guy. You know, so thinking about, you know, if something makes me vulnerable, so something that might make me feel vulnerable, that's a particular vulnerability of mine, is if I would say intelligence is one, but if people doubt, like when people don't give me the benefit of the doubt, that puts me in a really vulnerable space. So like, I like to be given the benefit of the doubt. So when I feel like I'm being, like when my intentions are being assumed rather than taken at face value, that's a real struggle for me. Okay. So that comes with it, like that came from a long history of that putting me in vulnerable positions. Okay, so these are things that build up over time. Now sometimes there's one nodal incident that could affect this, but would getting angry be considered feeling vulnerable? Well, I'll answer this a little bit better in a second here, Barry, but the argument for getting angry would be that that's a survival strategy for a vulnerability that's been stirred up. Okay. That one doesn't faze me, Krabby. But I appreciate the attempt. That one doesn't faze me at all. I'm so used to that one. Usually say just like, all right, well, there's a piece of paper I paid a lot of money for on my wall that says I am, and if you listen to me talk long enough, you'll probably think that I got my shit together, at least somewhat. So. But I get the point there, Krabby, and I actually appreciate you saying that because you saw a little bit of a survival strategy come up for me, which was justification. So there is I guess there is a bit of a vulnerability there that I won't be taken seriously. So you gotta dig here. Oh my God. Yeah, when I did the David Pakman interview wearing basically this, yeah, that was like all over the YouTube comments. Dude's wearing a backwards hat. It's crazy. That was real vulnerable for me. Put myself up there. So, you're old because your voice is low. Yeah, there we go, Barry. All right. So, is this making sense so far? You guys following me? I know Humune. I have terrible handwriting. Looks the same as it did when I was in kindergarten. Okay. So, again, vulnerabilities have a lot of premises and beliefs that follow them up. Okay, so I believe everybody should be given like the benefit of the doubt, at least the first time. I believe that everybody's experiences matter. That's another one, a real vulnerability for me, is if you tell me that my emotional experience doesn't matter, not cool, man. Like I get to feel the way I feel. You can hold me accountable for the way I talk to myself about it and the way that I interact with you when I'm feeling this way. But yeah, I throw a core belief out there every night when I sign off. So there's that, okay? So those contextual factors lead to vulnerabilities. So if I was gonna write an example of like my own, I might say like, invalid experiences, and oh my God, and questioned intent, okay, is hard for me. I think, let's see, I think invalidation, people doubting the validity of my experiences. I don't talk about the seriousness stuff and it really hurts me because I have so much self-doubt. I've been gaslit already and I don't want somebody to come at me and say that's not real. That's a beautiful example, Tess. It's a beautiful example. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about, right? Like if somebody pushes on that, it feels so vulnerable. Oh yeah, that too, Bonnie. Yeah, that's brutal. I would say feel vulnerable at all times about most things. I can hide it when I can or I'm able. You know, that's actually really cool, Tree Hugger. Like I think life is ripe with vulnerability and kind of how do you navigate it? So those are our vulnerabilities. So person one has their vulnerabilities and then person two has theirs. Okay. So let's say that maybe a vulnerability that this person experiences is when they feel helpless. Okay. That's really, really a vulnerable state for them to be in. And let's say also this person struggles when they're unheard. Or when they feel unheard. Okay, so these two people are walking into a relationship and into an interaction with entirely different vulnerabilities. So this person's coming, well, not entirely different, but you know what I mean. Like, I'm going to feel most, oops, sorry for hitting the mic there. I'm going to feel most vulnerable if I'm invalidated and if my intents are questioned. And this other person is going to feel particularly vulnerable if they are helpless or they feel unheard. And that's going to cause a core impasse for us if those vulnerabilities get hit. So what we do is we create survival strategies to either allow us to get away from feeling the vulnerability and being vulnerable in the moment, or in anticipation that we may experience the pain of what it's like to have our vulnerabilities thrown out on the table, okay? So this is a really important thing to start realizing of what this is, because oftentimes these survival strategies are developed over time and reinforced really significantly, and so to the point that they become automatic. So our survival strategies sometimes just happen, and most people don't have a ton of insight into what that process looks like and how they engage in it and what it means for them. So seeking out reassurance from others could be a survival strategy. Like, there's all sorts of survival strategies that can come from this, okay? So what I'm going to give you kind of examples of what this could look like for this person who struggles when they feel like invalidated or questioned, or like that their intent is not taken care of. Like, this person might become like harsh. Oops. So let's say there's like a level of harshness in their tone. Let's say that this person also spends a lot of time justifying. Okay, like even like unsolicited justification. Maybe there's a level of, you know, when I'm feeling like I'm being questioned, I will just relentlessly pursue the other person, like following them around, trying to justify it. I won't let it go. Okay. Or maybe I will just shut down completely as a way to avoid even having my intentions questioned at all, because if I don't share anything, then you won't know what my intentions are. Okay? So again, we're looking at tone here, we're looking at a behavior here, we're looking at a behavior here, and another behavior here. Okay, so we're looking very behavioral here. I know that my handwriting is horrible. Okay. Hey, Chief. It's good to see you. Okay. So these survival strategies are behavioral, but they can also be mental. So they can also be the level of self-talk that we engage in. So maybe this gets into some sort of narcissistic, like, I'm more important. Something like that. Okay, could be a survival strategy. I get into a meaning-making system that allows me to, again, distance myself from having to experience a degree of vulnerability that I may find to be hurtful. Okay? Making sense? So I hope that as you're doing this, like that as I'm talking about this, that you're thinking about maybe some of your own and what you do. Yeah, I know, Gecko. Well, here's the other thing, little fun fact. I'm doing this with my finger tonight because my Surface Pen died, and it uses a quadruple A battery, which I don't know about you, but I don't have quadruple A batteries laying around. So I'm actually drawing this with my finger right now. I wasn't actually going to say that, but now I'm saying it. Yeah, quadruple A, no joke. All right, hold on. I'll just show you because Yeah, look at this thing. Look how little this is. 4 A's. So, yeah, whatever. That's just karma for me taking too long to do a mental health topic night. Oh, absolutely, Alex. It could totally go that way. It could totally go that way. See, that's the thing is this. It doesn't have to be this way that I'm drawing it out. It could absolutely be that spiraling self-doubt, where maybe this person who is caught up in a vulnerability and trying to put out their survival strategy is to become incredibly self-deprecating, or they become really self-critical so that any criticism that they hear from the other person they don't have to attend to. Like it could be anything. Okay. Anybody want to oops. Anybody want to volunteer me up a vulnerability and a survival strategy? You are under no obligation to do it. But I will mimic some of the questions that I might ask about it if somebody's willing to do it. You'll volunteer, Lyrid? All right, so Lyrid, what's a all right, I'll do Lyrid and Kaladnar. So Lyrid and Kaladnar, what is, give me one core vulnerability. Like tell me something that makes you feel vulnerable. What's up, Astaroth? This is just for example purposes. This is not me doing therapy. This is just to show you what the questions look like, all right? You can use something benign if you want to, but think about times where like you feel particularly talking about my abusive ex. Okay. So a question that you are under no obligation to answer this, Lyrid, if you don't want to, okay? But the question I would follow that up with is to say, what is it about that that's painful? What is it about that stirs up vulnerability? Could you maybe share a little bit about that? Kaladnar, same kind of deal. Expressing how I truly feel to somebody. So what is it about that that's vulnerable? So is it a level of openness? Is it you know, so like Lyrid, for example, is it fear of judgment? Is it fear that people might take your ex's side? Is it a fear that you might be misunderstood, right? You'll notice a lot of it is rooted in fear. Vulnerability tends to be rooted in fear. So it makes it vulnerable. There's a fear. So, you know, is there a fear of isolation? So rejection. Okay, great. So we're going to do a hybrid. Oh, actually, no. Here's how we're going to do this. Ha ha ha. Again, you guys can tell me you want to pull out at any time. Okay. So we're going to have, this is going to be Kaladnar. This is going to be Lyrid. Okay. So fear of being judged. Okay. Okay. This is perfect. All right. I appreciate you guys doing this. This makes this so much easier for me to do it. Zoiku, you make a really good point. The thing is, that's just one example of what might make one person vulnerable. So we may challenge it for that person, but at the same time, we would want to also hold that is that person's vulnerability. So, like, absolutely, we can explore that stuff and we can unpack some of these vulnerabilities, but ultimately, the worry about the experiences being invalidated is not problematic as much as any behaviors that they might engage in. So perhaps that person has a survival strategy of shutting down any conversation that potentially challenges their viewpoint or like invites them to talk about it in a certain way. That's where it becomes problematic. So vulnerabilities are not really in and of themselves problematic so much as the survival strategies are. But absolutely, like I love what you're saying there. you know, there could be particular, like there could potentially be a vulnerability for a person interacting with that person where there's some worry that they're not trusted, or that they're not going to be heard, or that they're not going to be understood, or that the person's not going to get it. You know, for some people, like a vulnerability is, you know, being worried that of the isolation of having a better understanding of certain things than other people do. But all right, so we got Kaladnar and Lyrid here with rejection and feeling and worrying about feeling judged, okay, which I appreciate very much. All right, so Lyrid or Kaladnar are both at the same time, okay? When you are anticipating feeling rejected, or if you start to feel rejected, what do you usually do to protect yourself? Okay? Or when you're worried about being judged, like what do you do to either keep that vulnerability away, or what do you do to try to make it go away? Okay, so you put up walls and I disconnect. Okay, so Lyrid puts up walls. Did I just miss? Oh God, what alert did I just miss? Somebody just follow me, or did somebody sub? I completely missed the alert. I'm so sorry. Whoever it was, tell me who you were, because I want to say thank you. Okay, so walls, disconnect. Lyrid, is there a particular way? Oh, J Rose, thank you very much for the follow. Sorry that I missed it, but I appreciate it very much. You being part of the community. Welcome in. It should. I agree, Bonnie. Done and done. Okay. All right. So, yeah. So, Lyrid, I would ask a little bit more about the disconnection. So, what do you do to disconnect? Like, is that like physical disconnection? Is it that you then become maybe a little bit more quiet when chatting with somebody? Like what does that actually look like? Again, you don't have to answer that if you don't want to, Lyrid. That's just a question that I would ask to follow up on it to get more specifics about it. Okay, I obsessively stress and worry and reach out to said person to find out what's going on. Okay, so pursuit. And it sounds like reassurance seeking. Again, drawing this with my fingers because my pen died. Okay. Okay, this is beautiful. So, what happens here is if in their relationship, yeah, reassurance is a big one for a lot of people. Absolutely is. Reassurance seeking is often a way to try to mitigate anxiety, and it's not a healthy way to do it. Not saying that to judge those of you that do it. We all do it. It's just a really important thing to be mindful of, because reassurance seeking, it can be good, but it's not good if you're completely reliant on others to do the reassurance. It's kind of a both and. Changing topic or cutting off contact with that person for however long I feel. Okay, there you go. Great. God, I appreciate you guys very much volunteering to do this. This is awesome. Okay, so what happens here is for Kaladnar, the vulnerability of fearing of rejection, of what it feels like to be rejected or to anticipate rejection, fuels the survival strategy. So pursuit and reassurance seeking is something that over time we would hypothesize that Kaladnar has learned to do as a way to try and keep that vulnerability at bay. So if I get reassurance, I don't have to feel the vulnerability of rejection. Okay, if I keep pursuing you, you have to engage with me. I no longer have to feel rejected because I feel a sense of connection from you, whatever. Again, not claiming this is your experience, Kaladnar, I'm just giving it as an example. Okay, for Lyrid, when Lyrid feels judged, or when he's worried about what it might be like to be judged, there's a wall that gets put up. So we shut people out, we change the topic. I disconnect, because if I can disconnect, then I don't have to feel the judgment. Okay. I don't have to experience the pain of what it is to feel judged. Okay, so so that judgment, again, Lyrid would have learned at some point that putting a wall up is better than, say, putting himself out there. Because if Lyrid puts himself out there and he gets hit, or he does get judged by what he puts out there, then that hurts a lot. And so he may have learned, you know what? Nope, put a wall up and it's better. Okay, disconnect and it's better. So it's a survival strategy. This is how I make sure that I don't have to feel intensely vulnerable. There you go, Neuro. So trust. So again, is the vulnerability not being trusted, being overly trusted? You know, there's all sorts of stuff that we can go into. At the same time, we could actually dig deeper if we wanted to into the rejection and into the judgment, right? Rejection could potentially be your fear of isolation on Kaladnar's part, where judgment could potentially be a fear of isolation also for Lyrid, because if I'm judged, then people won't want to continue to connect with me. Again, whatever it might be. I'm not trying to claim to know more about you guys. This is just the way that a therapist's brain works when we start to hear this stuff. Well, that's a good question, Zoiku. So that would be another nuanced question that I might ask. So are you worried that you might be judged in a way that that doesn't align with your expectations of yourself or what you're trying to put out there? Or are you worried about just people making a perception of you and then operating off of that perception, in which case then we're potentially getting into, do I challenge that? Is there potentially a cognitive distortion there? Sure, Barry. If a person experiences that as rejection, absolutely. If you're like, okay, yeah, I've been kicked out of my home, and so that's my parents rejecting me, or whatever it might be. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay. But a rejection could be something so if this went off the rails for Kaladnar, rejection could be something as simple as, hey, I'd like to go out to dinner tonight. And let's say Lyrid says, no, I don't want to go out tonight. That may bump up against Kaladnar's vulnerability of rejection, in which case Kaladnar may then engage in his survival strategy, which he then directs towards Lyrid, by saying, by seeking reassurance, like, did I do something wrong? Like, do you not want to go out because I screwed something up? Sizgade, thank you for the follow. I appreciate it. Like, we might see again the pursuit of Lyrid. So, wait, but I want to go out. Can we maybe go out then tomorrow? Can we do something else? Can I stay here with you? Right? It goes on a running thing. It's a survival strategy, okay? Because Kaladnar is being confronted with a sense of rejection. Okay, so now this has the potential. This could go two ways. Okay, so this could just go at Lyrid and not affect him at all, in which case he might just be like, no, I just don't want to go out, and it may be fine. However, if when Kaladnar pursues or engages in reassurance seeking and it hits Lyrid's vulnerability, Lyrid is likely to go with his survival strategy. And then that's where we run into the vulnerability cycle, okay? Especially if this arrow hits here. Okay, so for Lyrid and Kaladnar, what would happen is Kaladnar says, okay, well, did I do something wrong? I must have done something wrong. And pursues and says, like, you know, well, you don't ever want to go out. Like, you don't ever want to do this. Like, you don't ever want to go out with me. Like, is it me? And let's say, for the sake of the vulnerability cycle, that when Kaladnar does that, Lyrid feels judged for not wanting to go out. Like, let's say there's a whole history of Lyrid just kind of wanting to stay home and not wanting to go out in public. And so Lyrid just kind of doesn't ever want to go out. And so he feels really judged whenever somebody pursues him on that and pushes him. And now Kaladnar is, by reassurance seeking and by pursuing, is rubbing up against that vulnerability. And so what we might expect to happen is that Lyrid's going to put their survival strategy out. So Lyrid is going to put the wall up, and Lyrid's going to disconnect. Now, what is that going to do? As soon as Lyrid puts a wall up and disconnects from Caladnar, all of a sudden, here we are. And we have just completely filled up Caladnar's vulnerability. And so then what's going to happen is Caladnar is going to pursue more and that's right, and look for more reassurance, and then it becomes a really nasty cycle. And then we are at, again, oh, come on, we are at our core impasse. Okay, so there's all of a sudden a big giant wall. The wall gets higher, and we go through this cycle, and it's brutal. Okay, so what's kind of funny here is the way that Caladnar, the way that you and Lyrid set this up, is it actually works out, because I would actually anticipate that this would not work if without you guys having some insight. You see, isn't it so cool how this works? Like, this gets me jazzed up. Like, I love it how this works. Okay. Someone's using avoidance tactics for fear of rejection. Where do you draw the line? Usually if it's causing distress, Ham. Distress is a big indicator of whether something is problematic or not. So if the client experiences it as being distressing, that happens, or if I notice a pattern of things getting worse because of the way that the person's acting, I might suggest to them that could potentially be an issue, if that makes sense. Fight to the death. Couldn't the cycle just be fixed by Lyrid lying and saying, I don't feel well, that's why I don't want to go out? Potentially, Bloody, yes. So that gets into the way in which we break this cycle, which is that Lyrid would need to know that Caladnar is basically engaging in his survival strategy, because what we have to do, oh, it's such a good question that takes it so beautifully in the direction that I wanted it to go, Bloody. What has to happen is Lyrid has to understand what Caladnar's vulnerability is, and Caladnar has to understand what Lyrid's vulnerability is. They have a full understanding of what each other's survival strategy is. So, because they see it, because it's behavioral, okay? Whereas they may not know the vulnerability that's behind it. Okay, so Caladnar might be operating off of an entirely different assumption for why Lyrid is acting this way, and dare we say, may judge Lyrid for that. Okay, may say, oh my God, Lyrid is just throws the wall up and it's ridiculous. Okay, like throws this wall up and Lyrid is just so cold and so distant and just not a warm and caring person at all. And now all of a sudden Lyrid might feel judged for that, which makes him further want to disconnect. Okay? Because Caladnar is making a judgment off of the survival strategy. Okay? Instead of understanding what the vulnerability is that is eliciting the survival strategy. Okay? So in therapy, one of the things that I'm facilitating is people being able to have a degree of insight into the vulnerability. Now, what makes this hard is Caladnar is probably not going to want to share that he is afraid of rejection, because if he does, it makes him more vulnerable. Because let's say Caladnar comes at Lyrid. Oops, hold on. Let's say Caladnar comes at Lyrid from a space of vulnerability. Okay, and Lyrid shuts it down. Let's say Lyrid throws up a wall, or Lyrid doesn't know how to attend to it. That would be devastating for Caladnar, because now not only am I being rejected, I'm being rejected for the thing that, like, by putting out on the table the thing that makes me intensely vulnerable. Okay, so it's actually really hard to get people to do this, which is why, as a therapist, I have to teach people skills for how to have these conversations. I don't just throw people to the wolves and say, okay, well, you know what, Caladnar, could you please just talk to Lyrid about your vulnerability? We're not going to do that. So what I'm going to say is, okay, before we have this conversation, I need to set up some rules for this conversation. So I know I keep starting with Kaladnar. I'm going to flip it. So Lyrid, we're going to let's talk a little bit about Lyrid and Kaladnar. We're going to talk about your vulnerabilities. But here's what we're going to do: is when we talk about it, I don't want either one of you to respond with anything. All I want you to do is just acknowledge and validate what that person's vulnerability is. Okay? So let's say we have Lyrid says to Kaladnar, well, Kaladnar, I really struggle when you, like, I really struggle with feeling judged by you. Like, I really worry that you think I'm a horrible, cold person, and that's scary for me. This would take a while for us to get there, but I'm expediting the process a little bit. So Lyrid says that to Kaladnar. That's a hell of a thing for Lyrid to do. And as a therapist, if I'm sitting in the chair and I see this happen, I'm like wanting to jump out of my chair for joy. Okay? So again, if Lyrid can share the vulnerability with Kaladnar, that's huge. So that Kaladnar can empathize with it. And Kaladnar's response there needs to be, I hear you. I hear, Lyrid, that you worry that I'm judging you. And what Kaladnar is probably going to want to do, this is what's going to make this so difficult for Kaladnar, is when Lyrid says this, Kaladnar is likely going to be worried that Lyrid is saying that he's judgmental and that he's going to be rejected for that. And so Kaladnar is going to have to recognize that his vulnerability is going to be pulled up here, as is Lyrid's. They both have to put their vulnerability on the table, but we're changing the interaction that happens. So Kaladnar has to be able to swallow that and say, okay, I'm going to wait. I'm not going to respond yet. Instead, I'm going to listen to what Lyrid is saying to me. Okay? So I'm going to acknowledge for Lyrid, I hear that you feel judged by me and that hurts and that's scary. And I appreciate you telling me that. And now Kaladnar's vulnerability is on the line. But here's the thing. Kaladnar just threw some beautiful empathy at Lyrid. And so what we would hope is going to happen is, let's say Lyrid drops the wall. Lyrid already made an attempt to connect by naming his vulnerability. Okay? So now Lyrid is operating from a space of vulnerability, and there's a different interaction that's happening as a result, which is really cool. Okay? So then that's when I would say, okay, great. I really appreciate, Kaladnar, that you could show Lyrid that you hear him and that you could validate his experience, that you could say that makes sense. I really appreciate that you didn't respond. Okay? Now, Kaladnar, I would like for you to share, and oh yeah, here's the other thing, is in having Lyrid, this is why sometimes I do this so quick I don't even think to share this with you guys. The reason I had Lyrid go first is because it drops Kaladnar's pursuit. Okay? It allows Lyrid to come forward first so that Kaladnar does not have to be back in the process of constantly pursuing Lyrid. So I've dropped that survival strategy by having Lyrid go first. So now that Kaladnar has had Lyrid come forward, has been able to validate, now that Lyrid's survival strategies are gone, Lyrid is now able to meet Kaladnar's vulnerability. When Kaladnar shares, I'm worried you're going to reject me. And again, Lyrid's going to have to sit with, well, you're judging me for being the kind of person that would leave you? Really? Lyrid has to keep that in check and say, okay, Kaladnar was able to just do this for me. Kaladnar was able to just validate me, and I'm going to validate him. So So Kaladnar, I hear that you're worried I'm going to reject you, that when we have these conversations, you're really worried that I'm going to leave you. And that makes sense, and I appreciate you telling me that. And that's going to be meaningful as hell for Kaladnar. And what it does is it makes it so that Kaladnar doesn't have to seek reassurance, because Lyrid in that moment then can say, I don't want to leave you. I don't want to leave you. I'm here with you. And he kind of shows that in the way that he shows up to that interaction. Okay. Is that just through setting an explicit structure or expectation? And what happens when these things are violated? When those things are violated? When we have these kinds of conversations, how do we encourage people to not go that extra step to denial and refutation? So Alex, that's an awesome question. I have to work, Alessa, thank you very much for the follow. I appreciate it. I have to work super hard with people, Alex, to be really active to stop them if that happens. And I set it up that way. I say, look, we are not here to respond. I'm going to jump in and tell you to stop if you try to jump in and respond to your partner. We are only here right now for you to listen. And I will break that down sometimes to the point where I will tell people what to say to their partner. And again, like the thing is, it's like any skill, you have to build it so it feels really oversimplified and almost infantile sometimes. But once people get into this, once Lyrid and Kaladnar, for example, can get into this modified way of engaging with each other, it becomes more second nature. Basically, the idea is that we want to keep reinforcing this until this becomes the automatic process instead of the one that they're currently in. See, I love it, Bloody. I absolutely love it. It's so much fun for me. No, that's a good question, Kaladnar. I can still ask them about their level of engagement with other people. I just have to rely on self-report. But we could still talk about a person's survival strategy individually, and work towards what are the modified behaviors you want to engage in. So next time you feel rejected, let's come up with a plan that's concrete. Maybe we even write it down on a piece of paper, so that next time you feel the rejection coming up, you can look at the paper and say, here's what I'm going to do instead. Here's what I'm going to remind myself. I'm going to tell myself they are not rejecting me, or whatever it might be. So you can totally do it individually. Absolutely, Alex. Absolutely. iMessages are huge, because an iMessage conveys my experience, which then puts that up for validation. But that's what's hard, is an I statement is, an I statement is going to be very vulnerable for both of them. Oh my God, really? There we go. Okay, it's going to be really hard for them. Oh yeah, totally don't. Thank you for the PSA on that, Bonnie. I'm still struggling to absorb it because it's a lot of feelings. Or maybe I'm just trying too hard. Well, no, see, that's the thing, Gerbo. This is why I say this takes a while. This takes a couple sessions. This isn't something that, like, people come into therapy and we do this in one section, and we do this in one session. This takes a while, because even the act of talking about the vulnerabilities is going to stir up stuff for people. So like, if you're sitting here and you're thinking about your own vulnerabilities while I'm talking about this and your own survival strategies, what most people are going to say to me when we get into talking about their survival strategies is, well, this is what I have to do. And the idea that there could be potentially an alternative way of interacting for some people is just, it's too hard right now. And they're wrapped up in a lot of emotions. And so it makes sense that it would stir up emotions. And again, that's where I'm also working with people to say, hey, be kind to yourself. This takes time. I'm not judging you for the fact that you are engaging in your survival strategies. This is what you know. You've had to do this for a long time. This is what you've learned to do. And basically what we're doing when we're engaging in this process is you're having to unlearn something that you've been using and has been reinforced for however long it's been reinforced. That's not easy. It's not easy at all. Before you can learn this, you have to unlearn what you're currently doing. But that's why I, as the therapist, am working with, like, helping people know what the actual alternative is, because most people, when you ask them what they would do instead of the thing they don't like doing, they don't have an answer because they're used to doing the thing that they don't like doing. So in order to break this cycle, it takes a lot of empathy. And it requires people to move away from blame. Alessa, doctor, can I ask about what paradigm are these sessions about? I'm not sure what you mean by what paradigm, Alessa, but this is a way that some therapists think about the way that people engage in defensiveness when they're vulnerable. And so as a therapist, this is something that I'm thinking of a lot when I'm working with couples, or I'm working with dyadic relationships, or even when there's multiple relationships in the room, as a way to make sense of how people bring themselves to interactions. And it gives a template for what are some alternative conversations we can have so that we can build some connection and attachment between the people that are in the room, instead of them engaging in these problematic cycles of blame and impasse and all this stuff. Because you guys just saw when I was doing this example with Kaladnar and Lyrid, you can see how quickly that becomes an impasse, and it becomes a really nasty, horrible cycle. So can we get cheers in the chat right now for Lyrid and for Kaladnar? Because that was perfect. You guys made that glorious to illustrate, and I appreciate it very much. Like, I really do. But yeah, Alessa, I don't know if I answered your question, but if I didn't, please ask again and clarify for me, because I want to make sure that I answer your question. Llama, good to see you. It's all right. If you don't have the cheers, just use what you got. But seriously, guys, I really appreciate you doing that. So I will actually, with clients, I will draw this out with them. Blackpool, good to see you. It's always funny, in the video and text are not synced up great. First, Dr. M posted 3 lines of cheers, and then he asked in the video if we can get cheers. That's right, I forgot about that, Gecko. I completely forgot about that. Okay, the thing about this that I want to make, the point I want to make real quick, sorry, I was checking my notes again really quick because I want to make sure I didn't miss something, is we want to get Lyrid and Kaladnar in this instance into a space where, instead of the vulnerability fueling a survival strategy, their vulnerability just goes directly over, just goes directly over to each other, so that it doesn't become a cycle. Okay, and what we want to do is help both Kaladnar and Bloody. Oh, whoever just gifted that to Bonnie, thank you for doing that. It was incredibly kind of you to do. Cheers, Bonnie. Now you have your coconut approved stamp. But seriously, whoever that was, I appreciate it very much. It was very kind of you to do. We want Kaladnar and Lyrid both to see that this, to see that this is a choice. Okay, that the survival strategy that you use, that the way that you interact when you're feeling this, because they're both going to still feel this. This doesn't just go away. Okay, Kaladnar's fear of rejection and Lyrid's fear of judgment doesn't just go away overnight. Okay, but to see that the way in which the vulnerability feeds this is your choice. How you engage when you feel vulnerable is a choice, but also how you anticipate your interactions with somebody. Like, you know, Lyrid's ability to be mindful of Kaladnar's vulnerability is, one, going to allow him to understand the survival strategy when he sees it. So if he sees Kaladnar pursuing, he can know, okay, Kaladnar probably feels rejected right now. I'm going to remind him that I'm not rejecting him. Or if Kaladnar sees Lyrid pulling away, he can say, you know what? Hold on a second. I'll bet you that Lyrid is feeling judged right now. I'm going to check in with him. Okay. But yes, vulnerabilities may never actually disappear. There are vulnerabilities for a reason, and we all have reason to be vulnerable. The idea that you are a person who's not vulnerable, not cool. Like, we're all vulnerable, and vulnerability is the pathway to intimacy, as is self-disclosure. So vulnerabilities are not bad. It's the way we engage in survival strategies that causes our problems. Oh, no problem, Melissa. I appreciate you re-asking. I am a couple and family therapist. So this is systemic in terms of like the approach that I'm taking with this. So I like to work with multiple people in the room instead of one person. So couple and family therapy, or relational or systemic therapy. Right, Blackpool? It's so cool. Like this stuff is awesome. And this is a really digestible way, I think, for people to understand interactions, which is why I like it. It's really translatable to being able to share with clients, as opposed to some of the theoretical stuff that we therapists learn is really difficult to take into the therapy room and to expect clients to understand. So, all right. So thank you again, Kaladnar and Lyrid. I appreciate it. Okay. Yes, absolutely, Black. Absolutely. You have a choice. The thing is, your emotional experience is not something that you necessarily have control over. There's a fallacy. People often think that they can control their emotions. Your emotions happen. Okay? And if you look at like different disciplines that really focus on like mindfulness and stuff, like all they say is just attend to your feelings, not change them. Like, the idea though is that the way that you talk to yourself about your emotional experience and the way that you engage with others as a result of it, those are things that you are accountable for and also have a choice in. So, any questions? Anything I can clear up about this? Because this basically wraps up the conversation. And wow, we're right at 110, which is kind of crazy. But I'm willing to answer any questions you guys have about this stuff, or in general, because I really love talking about this stuff. But Prince Musica, when you're working with multiple clients at a time, what do you do when one of the members just doesn't listen or rejects the other's feelings? It's really hard, Prince. People's readiness for change and for therapy differs, and a lot of times I see resistance as it just being the system pushing that person to have to go maybe a little bit quicker than they want, or that there's not trust there, or that I still have a relationship to build with that person. And so I often will engage in a lot of like understanding and empathy towards the fact that they don't want to engage, and I will try to get the system to do that as well. So like the other members of the room to say, you know what, we appreciate that you're not ready for this conversation yet. We hope that you will be, and we are going to hold you accountable to, if there's like a problematic process that comes from that, like we're going to hold you accountable to that. We might going to have to set some boundaries with you. There might be consequences to the fact that you don't want to engage with us, but ultimately there's going to be a level of respect, I think, that happens there, and an acknowledgement that maybe I don't have the relationship to push them too far yet. So I will often try to empathize with that. Teenagers all the time don't want to be in therapy, and so I'll usually say to them, that's fine. I get it. When I was your age, I wouldn't want to be in therapy either. And so sometimes the angle you can take is, well, what do you think we need to do is the best way to get you out of here? What do you think needs to change in order for you to not have to come see me anymore? And that usually makes ears perk up. But good to see you, Prince. I appreciate that question. Did systemic last year, really amazing how it works. Congrats for your work. Well, I'm glad you're here, Alessa. I hope you continue to show up. We talk about this stuff a lot. So I'm willing to answer questions anytime I'm streaming. So I hope you come back and you hang out with us. We have a wonderful community here. Are you studying psychology? The truth is, saying people say just ignore it only if you allow others to affect your feeling. Ignoring can be a survival strategy, but ignoring can be effective. Although, like, I think if you're constantly ignoring as a way to avoid the fact that other people might have a perception, I think that can be problematic. So there's nuance to that, Bloody, but sure, ignoring it can be really a useful way to get people off your back, at the very least. Exploring diversity of possible responses rather than falling to reactive patterns. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, Zoiku. Again, being able to see yourself as having choice over the way that you engage with yourself and others. Really, sometimes that causes anxiety for people, understandably so, because sometimes people don't think about that, and then they feel an immense amount of burden or like pressure or being overwhelmed by that. That's totally understandable too. Yeah, cloud of sulfur. Yeah, a lot of teenagers do. It's hard to find therapists that work well with the teen experience of therapy. So when you find a therapist as a teenager that works for you, it can be really great. My fiance, for example, works with a lot of teenagers, and she's fabulous at it. Gets referred to all the time for it. And I have a pretty good track record with teens as well. What kind of boundaries would you set with someone inner circle close who uses stonewalling and silent treatment? Well, what kind of boundaries do you want to set with them as a result? So when they stonewall you, what choice do you want to make about the way that you're going to engage with that? What consequence is there to that? Potentially, is the relationship on the line at some point? That's always a conversation that comes up, is what does it take for the relationship to be on the line? But again, if being stonewalled is not something that you appreciate in a relationship that you have the choice to be in, what's going to be the consequences to that person? I'm going to swap back to intro so I can chat with you guys this way. What's up, Eric? Good to see you. Appreciate you being here. Got sent away. Wasn't regular therapy. Regular therapy is cool. Oh man, yeah, that can be pretty traumatic, Clouds. Already finished uni and working on my thesis. Just about to graduate. Good for you, Alessa. Cheers to that. That's awesome. Bubbly wall's getting huge. So, yeah, this stuff's cool. I love it. I can talk about it forever. That's why I do my job. I love my job. I really love being a therapist. It's a lot of fun. Like the complexity of figuring out people's cycles, figuring out, what's the vulnerability behind it? How did they learn that that's the survival strategy? What keeps them from seeing themselves as being able to have a choice? All sorts of stuff like that. And you get a different answer every time. What's really cool is two entirely different people besides Kaladnar and Lyrid could have engaged in this and like given me their vulnerabilities and their survival strategies, and we might have fallen into a cycle, or we might have found a good pattern. And I love that it's so variable, that like there's not really like a specific formula that it has to fall in. So